Greetings, everyone. I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion. We're now in the home stretch when it comes to Everybody Loves Raymond Season 1. We are on the final disc in the last 3 episodes. Been a couple months since I started this journey, and here we are. And unlike the rest of them, I actually have notes for these last 3. So if you see me looking down like that while talking, it's because I'm reading some stuff off of the notes. A couple things. Now, the first episode from this disc is Neighbours. Now, like the previous episode, this one would definitely go into my top 10 of Season 1 category because of its subject matter and how well the actors and writers pulled everything off. And it's such a basic idea, but unlike some of the other ones that I've said that about in this season, I don't see this one being in a later season as easily. I mean, you could have, in theory, put it in a later season, but then there's so much other stuff about the episode you'd have to change. You'd, work the kids into it somehow, change some of the attitudes of some of the characters because of all the pure continuity stuff that goes in, like Robert's relationship with Amy and some other factors. That it's this works better as a Season 1 episode. And part of that is the writing, like I've already said. It was written by Jeremy Stevens, who wrote Your Place or Mine, another one of my favorite episodes this season. And in the following seasons, these are a couple of the episodes he wrote. Brother, one of my favorite episodes of the next season. The Ride Along, another one of my favorite episodes. I don't remember if that one actually made my top 10 of the whole show video I did years ago, but it would be in the running for a longer list. The Lone Baron, that one, if I remember right, did make the list. And of course, he wrote a bunch of other ones, so I didn't want to put all of them, but this is one of my favorites from Season 6, Homework. You're a writer, and that's the way you use the English language. So many quotable lines from that episode. Of course, he also wrote the next episode, Fascinating Deborah, which can't all be winners. The plot of the episode is that, as we've seen from the series up till now, Ray's parents can be annoying. Throughout the whole show, we've seen how they can be annoying to him, to Deborah, a little bit to the kids, but not as much, and to their friends. But now, we get to see just how bad their annoying behavior can be when it radiates out from that little area into the rest of the neighborhood, or at least the neighborhood within the block. Because as the episode starts, Frank had these lights set up on the front of the house that if any movement goes, especially near his vehicle because it's parked on the street, these lights will go on. And these are no ordinary lights. These are lights that they're so bright that from across the street into Ray and Deborah's room, it's like you're shining a bright light up. And just looking at it through the windows of the set, it's like, oh, that's a bright light. There's no reason you need to have it that bright. If you're going to set up lights to protect your car from burglars, set it up to where at least just the area around where the vehicle is illuminated. You don't need to have it lit like as they say in the dialogue, like the mothership is landing. And then to go hand in hand with that with a car alarm that goes off just from pulling down a window. It's like, Frank. And part of this is because Ray gave him a gift called the Big Book of Hobbies, where he's doing woodworking amongst other projects. In the course of the episode, we see he makes a birdhouse. And you top this off with the other behaviors they've been doing. The neighbors decide that they're going to have they don't use the word, but it's kind of staging an intervention without getting the parties involved. But they just decide, well, given the temperaments of the people involved, they're going to go the safe route and go with Ray and Deborah. They have a meeting at their house, and they all bring their concerns in. And the neighbors, the actors all do a pretty decent job, and I looked up their IMDb thing. They are career actors, mainly television work and bit parts in films. And their names are Kathy Ladman, Stephen Hack, Lance Nichols, and Patricia Belcher. Like I said, they all do a pretty good job with what minimum dialogue they have. A couple of them only have 1 or 2 lines, and the rest of them is a bit more, but it works in the scene. And they give all their complaints, in addition to the noise and the lights. I believe it's Steven's character. Maurice signs for his packages and neglects to inform him, which I'm guessing means that she either signs for them and then does not give them to him, which Last I checked, even if it's not coming from the U.S. Postal Service, that's probably illegal, even if it's just petty theft. But more than likely, she signs for him and then puts them in his house, where, not in his house, in his property or whatnot, to where someone can just walk up and go, which would be annoying. I mean, porch pirates, a pox on all of them. I could tell you if I was walking down the front of my property and I saw someone trying to do that, I would chase them down. Especially if they actually had the item. But, so I could see his annoyance at Marie just doing that, and then probably with her behavior, I'll sign for that, dear. Just how Marie is. And then, of course, Frank, in addition to his more recent things, blowing a dead chipmunk into one of the neighbor's yards. Like, that's something Frank would do. It's like, that's so Frank. Of course, when he hears it, Marie just tries to blow it off. Pun intended. Until the neighbor brings out video evidence, which is kind of fun that I actually have the camera angled where you see videotapes behind me, because it is the old school videotape. This is probably one of those things that if you show this episode to a younger member of the family, or in subsequent years, newer people start discovering the show, they're like, what is that in his hand? And then you have to say, oh, that's a VHS tape. What's a VHS tape? That'll be one of those things that, like, I feel so old. Hasn't happened yet, but that'll probably be eventually. Maybe not so much because of, but you never know. This tape has evidence of Frank picking up his morning paper in his underwear. Alright, not so bad. He's in his underwear. I mean, not the best thing. Shows a lack of situational awareness, but not illegal, as far as I know. At least in California, I don't believe it is. In New York, probably it's not either. Maybe at the time. Like I said, just lack of situational awareness. Drops a plate thing and then picks up the food and eats. It's like, hey, 10-second rule. It's not like he dropped it in dog crap or on the dirt. He just dropped it on the cement. And then we get the kicker to where it's like, okay, now he has an issue. Frank goes to pick up the paper in his towel. He drops the towel. We don't see it, obviously, but he now has a case for being naked in public. Because he is in the front part of his property where there's nothing blocking him. And if anybody came out there, they would see everything. And he has it on camera. As he calls it Exhibit A. But the whole thing with this is that they want Frank and Marie to calm down their behavior, or they're going to do some type of petition, that was what they call it, to get them removed from the neighborhood, which Deborah brings up the point with that. Is like, is that possible? Now, the way she says it very quickly afterwards, and the way Ray looks at her, it's like they're playing up the fact that she wouldn't mind it, because, you know, they stop barging in every 5 minutes, even though they're family, and she doesn't want them to be suffering. You know, it's that little weird gray dichotomy with Deborah that I like that they bring up every now and then. Here it's for comedy, and of course Ray looking at her like, are you serious? But she does bring up a point. It's like, can the neighbors legally have them kicked out of the neighborhood just because they don't like how they're behaving? I mean, with the noise and the lights, they could file a complaint with the police department and at least have the police pay a visit to them. They tell them, like, hey, lock it off. Which, of course, considering that Robert lives there, it'd probably be his lieutenant or captain to be like, hey, Robert, is something you want to tell us about what's going on at home? Yeah, you might want to tell your parents to calm it down, or else we're going to have to pay a visit there, which will look a little embarrassing considering we have one of our sergeants living there. They never really mentioned that in the course of the show, but it's one of those things I mentioned is that they treat I think I mentioned this in passing before, but I'll mention it again in a later episode, is that they treat Robert more like he's a beat cop than the fact that he's supposed to be a supervisor. Sergeant, two chevrons, that's a supervisor rank. Yet they never address that. Even when he becomes a lieutenant and he has a bar, that's also a supervisor rank. But anyway, back to my point is like, other than having the police visit them for the complaints and all that, can they legally kick them out of the house? I mean, if it's an HOA, I could kind of see them getting fined for all of it and then eventually forced out of the house, depending on what the bylaws are. But there's no indication in this episode, in past episodes, or future episodes that they live in an HOA. Granted, they live in Lynbrook on Long Island, so there's a possibility that they are one. But there is nothing stated in dialogue, so I'm going to have a leap of faith and assume that they're not in an HOA, so that's off the table. Is there any laws? I mean, I tried to do a quick little Google search before sitting down, and everything I popped up for was like for tenancy. And as we find out later, they are not tenants as in they're renting. They have a mortgage. So it's like, is there some weird little thing until you own the whole house outright they can't kick you out? Or is it one of those weird things that I just sit there scratching like, what legal room would they have to stand on other than getting the police involved over the noise complaints and all the other little things? They'd be able to get the police involved, but I don't think they'd be able to kick him out of the house. So I think going that far is probably just a scare tactic. Of course, either way, once Frank and Marie find out what's going on and see the evidence, they react the way you would think. Especially when they take it the wrong way and assume it's Ray and Deborah who are making the complaints, and they overreact, and Marie even steals the VCR, which I love. It's like, that's Marie. Then after that, whenever Ray sees his parents, they're giving him the cold shoulder, which you can definitely tell, like, oh, yep, they're still mad at him, and they're overreacting, as only they can, which makes Ray guilty, as he is. He's definitely a mama's boy still, and he starts to not being able to sleep, and he gets this weird little vision in the bathroom from his parents, even after the neighbors are cool with them, after they've apologized and made amends with a little party that apparently Ray wasn't invited to due to his parents being passive aggressive. Like the way that I love the way that Doris Roberts sells this when she tells Ray, we don't really have anything else to discuss, Ray. Just the way she says it, the way Doris enunciates her lines when she's being sarcastic, and then when she's being passive aggressive, and all these different emotions that fit the character. She was excellent at selling this character. Just the way she says this line in this episode, it's like, you want to reach through the, even though she's an elderly woman, you want to reach through the screen and smack Marie. That's how well Doris plays it here. You also want to smack Frank for how much of a pig he is at points in this episode. Mainly his past ones, but you also want to smack him. More so in the towel one. You want to rewind, go through, and smack that bald head of his. Well, Ray's feeling so guilty, he decides to invoke a higher power, and he goes to confession, which they do with some little Catholic jokes here, like, where's the confession booth? And he's like, oh, he finds out there isn't one anymore, which I kind of knew that because I was raised Catholic. I don't practice anymore, but I was raised in that. And when I was going through all the stuff, they didn't have a booth. At first I thought maybe it's because it was the church building was new, but it looks like that might have been something that was abolished, which, on the one hand, just as a little aside, I kind of see why, and I also kind of don't see why. I mean, with the booth, you have that little privacy thing. I mean, if it's at Mass, you look over and go, hey, blah, blah, blah's going to the confessional. Hey, I wonder what they're confessing. Which you still get that whole thing if you see them talking over in the corner with the priest and like, oh, they're confessing. But you also get that little sense of privacy to where it's just you, the priest, and God with the confession booth. But then, even so, the priest is going to know who he's talking to even in that thing, but still, the booth gives you that sense of privacy. Here, though, unlike what I remember from the few I had to do going through everything, I remember it's set up in its own little room, so there is still some privacy. It's just you're not in a booth, so there's a little bit of both. And the priest in this episode is played by Don Perry. He passed away in 2012, but there's no birth year given on his IMDb page. And based on the credits I saw for him, he looks like he was a character actor. And he does a pretty good job here playing the priest. You know, talking with Ray, trying to figure out why he has this sense of guilt. Ray feels he's broken one of the commandments. And I love the way Don's like, really? And then when he finds out which one, he's like, I don't really get that one a lot from people in your age group. Which I think he's pleasantly surprised by. Because he's like, he wants to hear why. Ray goes and explains everything like I've gone through. And the priest mentions, like, this could be coming from a deeper place. And Ray thinks that maybe he feels that the neighbors are right. I would play devil's advocate and say that it's the halfway thing. The neighbors are right to a point, but not to the extreme that they wanted to go, like I've said. And Ray has nothing to feel guilty about because, like Deborah pointed out in the previous scene, he was defending them against the neighbors. It's just that they took it wrong, so he has nothing to apologize for. And I wouldn't apologize, but then again, if it was my parents wanting to be kicked out of the neighborhood, I'd be like, screw them, kick them out. But that's my parents and my whole situation. So I'm a little jaded there. If it was my grandparents, especially the ones I live with, I'd be pissed like, you're going to kick a little old Irish lady out just because of something? Then again, I don't know who would want to kick my grandmother out of a neighborhood to begin with, but that's getting a little bit off topic. What really makes the confession scene for me is that as the priest is trying to help Ray cope with whatever guilt he might be feeling, he starts bringing up a situation involving another member of the parish. And as it goes on, you're like, wait a minute, this guy sounds familiar. And it turns out he's talking about Frank. In the moment the priest realizes that Ray's parents are Frank and Marie, he's like, "You're absolved." And the way he puts it, I could look it up, but I'm almost positive. he just, it's like, the moment he realizes, like, he's feeling guilty over Frank. Frick it. That just tells you, well, Frank and Marie must have such a bad reputation if even a priest at the church they attend is like this. And of course, this is the first of two priests we see at their parish. The other one, of course, is Father Hubley, who was introduced at the end of the next season, but then later on they do a whole retcon thing, but I'm getting ahead of myself with that. Would have been nice to see Don come back as a secondary priest and him interact with Father Hubley, and then, Don roll his eyes when he sees Frank. But at last, he's just one of the guest stars in there, and he does a good job for what he has to do. He appears at the end where he's talking with Robert about thoughts he has about his parents, which, given how the parents act about regarding Robert most of the time, other than when they want to butt into his life when it involves his relationships and any children he might have, you can see why he has this resentment. And Ray does eventually apologize to him, which is like, fits his character, but it's one of those things where you just like, when you watch it, especially since they go back to favorites, prioritizing Ray's life and achievements over Robert's and everything, you're just like, oh. But that's the Barone family in a nutshell. All in all, this is a pretty fun episode, has a very interesting premise. Ray's guilty for no reason, but Ray Romano does sell it pretty well. All the actors do a good job. The guest characters are good, even though the neighbors, not really a lot to them, and they're never seen again. I mean, there's some other neighbors that are mentioned off screen, like Mrs. Scarpula, who I believe is one of Ray's next door neighbors, whereas I believe the neighbors we see in this episode are probably, well, I know one's 2 doors down, the other ones are probably across the street by Ray's parents, but they're still neighbors in a sense. But we never really see any of them in person again, which is probably a scheduling issue. The only other thing of note to mention about this episode is the cameo by retired baseball manager Tommy Lasorda, which it just entails him showing up to Ray's place, trying his sauce, thinking that it needs some more, and then as he's helping Ray figure it out, it basically goes into a whole spiel, kind of a play on Tommy's manager style, even ending with him going, rookie. It is fun for what it is, but you can definitely tell, this is one of those moments that, you can cut it out in syndication. It definitely goes with the theme of all the other cameos we've seen up until now. Of the non-story related ones, this is probably my favorite, and this is not the first time that Tommy is actually brought up in the show. It is the first time, but it's not the last. We see him, I think it's next season, off screen, he's talking around the phone. I like that one a bit funnier because it's where do you think you're going with that cookie? Nothing else to mention about this one. And until next time, guys. And boy, am I going to have some things to say about Deborah.